through Zen, I've learned over the years, it's good to have a beginner's mind. It goes back to Cage. It's like, I don't have any answers. I don't know. I'll try everything or anything just to make the project work.
Hello, print friends, and welcome. I'm your host, Miranda Metcalf, and I release weekly episodes with people around the world who share our love of printmaking. So if you like what we do, please rate us and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really does make a difference. Or just tell a fellow print friend about the podcast, and they can enjoy it too. We also have a Patreon page where supporters join at tiers that start at just $1 a month, and that really helps us to keep bringing you printmaking content every week. You can also get thank yous like exclusive merchandise, as well as access to our bonus content, shop talk with our editor, Timothy Pauschak, quick and dirty tips and tricks with our guests about materials, processes, business advice, and general studio nonsense. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, you can check out the link in the show notes and sign up to hear Tim's chat with today's guest. And if you want to save a little cash and still support the show, you can now sign up for a yearly subscription and receive 15% off that tier price. Printmaking forever, shun the non-believers. This episode of Hello Print Friend is brought to you by Speedball Art Products, who've been offering a diverse range of high-quality products to your practice since 1997. If you're following along on Instagram, and we really recommend that you do, you'll no doubt seen the newest initiative in the print world, Speedball's Print Posse. Working with artists like Carlos Hernandez and Tom Huck, they have created a brand new line of custom printing inks and papers to push your practice even further. So head on over to Speedball's Print Posse shop at speedballart.com to find out where you can pick up a can of your new favorite color. There's a link in the show notes. My guest this week is Paul Mullowney, a master printer and professor at Pacific Northwest College of Art. We'll talk about his familial ties to printmaking, big names like Sol le Wit, John Cage, and Kathan Brown, just to name a few, traveling around the world through printmaking, weathering the storms of recession, and giving back to the community to which you belong. So, without further ado, sit back, relax, and prepare to wipe a plate with Paul Mullowney. Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Hey, Miranda. It's going well. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I'm really honored.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get a chance to chat with you a bit in depth. You know, we've actually had a chance to meet briefly before in Seattle when you were there for Sando Burke's exhibition at the Copland Del Rio Gallery of the American Procession. But of course, at an opening, it's always crazy. Yeah.
Right. And then I think we met at a conference once or twice, maybe in Kansas, in Texas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. We've kind of been in the printmaking orbit together for a while, for sure. But I'm really looking forward to actually getting to have an in-depth conversation with you. So before we get started on some of the details, can you just give yourself a little introduction for everyone listening and say who you are and where you are and what you do?
Sure. My name is Paul Mullowney, and I'm currently in Portland in our studio of Mullowney Printing. And we moved here about a month or two before COVID hit, originally from San Francisco. I say we because I've been doing this for many years in many different iterations, and I started Mullowney Printing in San Francisco in about 2010, and it was named after my grandfather's commercial printing business in the early 1900s that he had in Minneapolis. But I was working with a former student of mine, Harry Schneider, and we decided to become business partners, and we expanded and pulled up stakes from San Francisco, not entirely. We still have a little letterpress studio there. And we moved to a large 5,000 square foot space in Portland's Pearl District in the northwest. So that's what we do is We publish prints, and we do contract printing, and we do workshops and outreach and community engagement. All that, like with everybody else, kind of slowed down and came to a halt during COVID, but we're super excited to be doing it again and expanding. But our main thing is fine art print publishing, and by that, within that realm, we do all kinds of, we have all kinds of different media. I'm primarily an etcher. We do a lot of photogravure, etchings. We do letterpress, screen printing. We have a big old school Dufa offset press on which we do monotypes and woodcuts and offset printing. Not high-speed offset printing. It's manually inked and run, and we do a lot of that. So we work with all kinds of artists, a lot of tattoo artists, a lot of emerging artists, a lot of well-established artists. And we try to engage with younger people, our interns and students, and we offer our presses up for social justice print projects that revolve around, broadsides and wheat pasting and all that.
Excellent. Well, I definitely want to talk a lot about some of those things that you mentioned a little bit later on in our chat here. But if we could back up a little bit, and could you let people know where you grew up and what role art played in your life? And also, I'm fascinated by this idea that your grandfather had early 1900s printing business as well. That sounds like a really interesting connection.
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a small town in southern Idaho called Twin Falls, and my father was a newspaper publisher there. He owned a daily newspaper called the Times News. But my family was all from they were from Minneapolis and Le Sueur, Minnesota. My father moved the family to Twin Falls when he bought the paper, and when I was just 7 months old. So I guess I always had, when my grandfather was a printer, so I had the graphic arts in my blood. I had ink flowing through my blood. My grandfather very well. He started Mullowney printing as he was a commercial lithographer, in the early 1900s, probably up until the time of the Depression. And he was a painter, so, I grew up in a household that wasn't really, I wouldn't say art was a big part of what we knew and everything. I came into the graphic arts through photography. I became interested in journalism, photojournalism. My brother was a photographer. My father ran the newspaper, so that kind of just kind of fell into place. And I studied photography, and I didn't get into printing until a little bit later in life, later in my 20s.
As you said, you had this growing up experience, which I think is a little bit unusual for people, in that you were around printmaking and you knew what it was. I've interviewed, I think at this point, over 100 people for this podcast. And usually the story goes, I like to draw, I like to paint. And then at one point I suddenly saw a printing press and a light bulb turned on, and so they have this kind of narrative of like, wow, what is this? But for you, it sounds like it was just already sort of a part of your world growing up. I'm curious to know, did you think that you were going to sort of follow in your father and grandfather's footsteps and be in printmaking?
My father, yeah. Like I said, I didn't know that much about my grandfather. He, I don't know exactly what happened, but I do know that he went out of business over a labor dispute, and he was beaten up by some labor organizers, and he almost died. And I don't think he almost didn't survive, and he never really went back to work after that, and he lost the business. And then my father supported him for the rest of his life. And so it was one of those things that was just, sort of ugly part of American history that a lot of families went through and never really talked about again. And so, but no, I grew up in the press room. I used to go and see my dad, and it was just a small town, daily newspaper. But it was the second largest daily in the state. So it was a pretty big deal. And I remember the smell of the ink and going into the warehouse with all the rolls of newsprint stacked up, waiting to go to the presses, and they'd like all the way to the ceiling, and we'd climb up and we'd go down these tunnels, and it was really scary. And I just loved all the presses, but no, I never thought I would really get into print making. That came later when I went to Japan, but I knew I wanted to be a photojournalist. I really loved photography, and that's just what I wanted to do. But that changed later on in life.
Yeah, that's interesting because when I was growing up, I also was really interested in journalism, and particularly photojournalism as well. And I would buy books on it and check out books from the library, and that kind of power of being somewhere and documenting what's happening, and the power of an image, I think, was really instilled in me during that time. And, now obviously being in the quote unquote fine arts, that's the power of an image has kind of a bit of a different meaning, but I think it really planted a seed of understanding that images do things that words don't, and that these are significant and can be powerful things. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I was growing up, and I was very young when the Vietnam War was going on, and that's when that all kind of shifted, and just the allure of get a job and go around the world and travel and photograph was really, really great. And then I went to University of Missouri for journalism school, and they had a really great exchange program with a university in Tokyo. So I only lasted 2 semesters my freshman year. The next year I went off to Tokyo, not sure what I would end up doing, and studied at a university there. And after 2 semesters, decided to take a break, and I didn't come back for a long time. So yeah. I was at that point exposed to Japanese culture, which has had a grip on me ever since. And I've spent a lot of my life in Japan. And when I came back to America, I was just bouncing around, and there was a group of Japanese. I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and this was long before it was, even a twinkle in the hipsters' eyes. It's like the mid '80s, and there were. Sol le Wit had a screen printing studio. His screen printer was named Joe Watanabe, and he had a whole crew of Japanese kids working for him, expatriates. And I just fell in with them because I knew so many Japanese people. And I started working at Sol le Wit's studio. And eventually I didn't last in New York too long. And then as I was leaving, I'm like working for Joe, who was like an amazing printer, but also he handled all of Sol le Wit's wall projects too. So, but every day at lunch, they would cook pasta and they would drink beer. It was like old school. So, I mean, back in the day when it was really relaxed and not stressful. I go back to San Francisco, where I had spent a lot of time, and I wanted to go to the Art Institute there. And they were just starting an etching studio in the screen printing studio. And the woman, I can't remember her name, she was in charge of his etchings, and she said, "Well, when you go to San Francisco, you should check out Crown Point Press." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Cool, I'll do that." And so I got to San Francisco and sort of forgot about it, and I was bouncing around and starting to do my own woodblock prints and stuff by then, and got really enthusiastic about Munakata and, the contemporary, the folk art movement in Japan, and especially Munakata. I started making large-scale woodcuts and stuff. But one day I was driving and listening to the radio, and it was the Berkeley station, KPFA, I guess it is, right? And John Cage is on the radio, right, live. Mm-hmm. And they're asking him, "Well, what are you doing in town?" And he said, "Well, I'm at Crown Point Press right now, and I'm working on some etchings there," because he used to go there every year. And I'm like, "Whoa, cool. I'm going to go to Crown Point Press." The next day, I went, and I cold called, and I knocked on the door, and Kathan Brown was there. She let me in, and I said, "I'm interested in interning for you or working. I'll work for free. I'll sweep the floors. I don't know anything. I worked for Sol le Wit, and I'm starting to get interested in this stuff." And she's like, "Oh, well, we're looking for a printer right now, and I wouldn't have you sweep the floors for nothing, but you can apply for the job." And she started showing me around, and she said, "By the way, John Cage is here right now." And I go, "Oh, really? I didn't know that." And the studios were big, and these are the old studios on Folsom. Subsequently, 3 weeks after that, were destroyed by the '89 earthquake. But she opens the door, and there's John Cage, setting newspapers on fire and running them through the press. And I'm like, oh my God. And they hired me about a week later.
Oh my gosh.
And I became a master printer there.
Wow.
And I ended up working with John twice before he passed away.
That's a beautiful story. I love hearing from someone who kind of has worked firsthand with John and was there seeing the fire prints, because I feel like they're such an icon in the history of contemporary printmaking. Tim and I were just talking the other night that if you're ever hearing a lecture on contemporary printmaking, it's like you could play like a drink when they mention John Cage's fire prints. But I think it just speaks to really what a presence that they have, and his incredible mind in the way everything he approached, it was never straightforward. It always was, how can I think about this in a way that no one else has thought about it before? So
absolutely. I mean, he made a huge impact on everybody and my life. And so I'd been working there for about a year, and then he used to come every January. So Kathan put me in charge of the next project. It was my very first project I was going to lead. And she said, "I want you to work with John Cage." And I'm like, oh my God, okay. I'm so excited. She said, "Here's his number. You have to call him and see, what kind of papers he wants to, and what you need to do to get ready and stuff." So it's like, his number, 212, whatever it was. And of course, this is long before any of the stuff we have now, but his whole thing in life is he always picked up the phone. He didn't have an answering machine, and in fact, he never listened to recorded music or any recorded thing at all. So I call him and he picks up, and I'm like, oh my God. Anyway, that's what my first project was. We continued the fire burning prints. It was called Smoke Weather, Stone Weather, and we would light the newsprint on fire, and the paper was damp, and you would drop it on there and run it through the press, and the paper would be scorched, and then on top of that we printed a bunch of beautiful etchings. He was amazing. I don't know where I hadn't met him, at such a young age, and not really knowing anything about the world or Zen. I had been to Japan, but I didn't absorb a lot of the stuff that he had to teach me.
Yeah. You had mentioned that printmaking, that connection, your personal connection with it, formed in Japan. And you spoke to it a little bit, but I'm wondering if you could dive in just a bit more and sort of say, exactly how, it kind of maybe captured you within that context. Whereas obviously you'd seen it before, been exposed to it in the commercial setting through your father, but was it, sort of seeing the Japanese tradition, or was it maybe that you were just in a place in your life where you were open to be taken in by something?
Oh yeah, I was open to be taken in. I was living in Tokyo, and I was like 22, and Tokyo back then was amazing. Well, it still is, but it was it was relatively cheap to live there. You wouldn't think it was, but I don't know. I didn't come into ukiyo-e prints until later in life, when I started studying them more closely, and so it wasn't the ukiyo-e stuff that turned on. It was more the Buddhist sculpture and Zen culture, and I was really influenced by German Expressionism, and I kind of see that as a direct link to I don't know if it's a direct link, but not dissimilar from Shiko Munakata, who sure. I just kind of I fell in love with his black and white work and the hand-painted stuff, and so I just got some gouges and some wood, and I started sort of emulating his style, and I just loved all that. I didn't have formal training at all until I went to Crown Point, and then learned etching, and at Crown Point Press, that's kind of the way they like it. They hired me because I was raw and didn't know what I was doing, so they were able to teach me.
Yes.
And that's kind of the way they worked back then, and still do.
And then, so how many years were you at Crown Point?
Not many. I think 3 or 4, maybe 3. When the recession hit in, was it 92 or whatever? There were printers there at the time. It was really rocking, It was really fun. And we moved into the new building after the earthquake, where they are now, across from the museum in San Francisco, across the street from the Museum of Modern Art. Uh-huh. And then, but the recession hit, and Kathan had to lay off quite a few of us, and I didn't make the cut. And then that's when I went back to Japan. I had been working with Shoichi Ida at Crown Point Press, who's a great artist from Kyoto, who's passed away a long time ago. But he said, come to Kyoto, come to Japan and work for me. So I pulled up stakes and went to Nara, and worked at a small studio called Kurumaki Kobo that was doing all of Ida's printing at the time. So I just fell into that, and so I was at Crown Point just a few brief years.
Yeah, I just feel like what you're describing of working in a little studio in Nara, I just feel like that's just sounds like such a dream. I don't know. Nara is just such a incredible city. It doesn't feel real. At least, I've only been there as a tourist, but the deer, the temples, the rain, like it's just an amazing place. And so the idea, that you could sort of stay there and do work on prints, I'm just like, oh my gosh, like that sounds like a dream.
I know, it was amazing. It was outside the city of Nara, up the way a little bit near Kashihara Jingu, which is a huge Shinto shrine and a very sacred place. And then there was a burial mound just outside of the studio, a wooded area that was, I don't know, it must have been, it was the tomb of Empress Saime, and I think it might have been, I don't remember now, but 9th or 8th century. So you're just in the midst of, Nara was that was where all of that really started. That's where Buddhism first came, from China and Korea, because Nara was considered the terminus of the Silk Road, which a lot of people don't realize. So that's when Buddhism came there in the 9th or 8th century. And all the historians out there, don't get on my case. I don't know. But anyway, what you're saying is, it's really, the history and culture there is so beautiful, and the mana is, the energy is so amazing, and I just loved it. So I ended up working there. I came back, I got my visa straightened out, and then I dragged my then girlfriend, now wife, Kate, back with me, and we ended up caretaking a Zen temple in the mountains of Nara, which it was a 16th century temple and had fallen on hard times and no longer had monks, but it was up in the woods and had a beautiful altar room, and was connected to Daitokuji, a very famous, big, huge Zen temple in Kyoto, where Gary Snyder and anyway, I set up a little studio there, and I called it Tokugenji Press, and we were there for like 9 years in the 90s, just hanging out in the mountains of Nara and trying to survive.
Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. So after Japan, what came next? Was that Hawaii? Because I know you spent some time there as well.
Yeah, so we finally needed to move on from Japan because living in the mountains in a temple was really awesome. But I wake up one morning thinking my career has kind of stalled. I'm not old enough to die in a temple. So we need to get out of here. And we went to. My wife has family in Maui, so it was the next best stop without having to come back to the mainland, which would have been complete culture shock, after that. So I ended up, we were on Maui for a number of years, where we there's a small art center called Hui Noeao, which is a great art center that's been around for like 70 years. And I had taught some workshops there, went back and forth from Japan, and one of the board members asked me to come back and help them sort of kick the print studio into a little bit of higher gear. So I started a residency and publishing program there. And that was really great. We worked with a lot of great artists there who we invited to come, and it was beautiful because, when you're trying to invite artists to come and work with you to publish prints, Maui's a pretty good draw. So
I bet, yeah.
It was upcountry Maui, just below Makawao and on the North Shore, and a really beautiful old estate. And so we worked with Judy Pfaff and Nicola Lopez and Joyce Kozloff and my friend Robert Kushner, who I had done a lot of work with at Tokugenji Press, and who were new to me, like Artemio Rodriguez came, and we did a really large print, and Swin came, and it was, the residency was funded by the Hawaii Community Foundation, so there for that there was community programming too. There were lectures, but also workshops, and Swoon worked with some local kids for the high school kids for like 2 or 3 weeks and put together this big exhibition and they did wood block portraits, and she turned them onto that, and then we had a big exhibition at the exhibition space, and it was really cool. Cannonball Press, Martin and Michael came out and worked with kids. Artemio worked with local students on a loteria project, and it was really, really, really cool. But then the other recession in 2008, kind of took that, and we had to regroup, and that program just didn't survive, unfortunately.
Yeah. So. Hearing you tell your story a bit in this sort of, you were at Crown Point, and then you had the .com bubble, and then you were in Maui, and you had the housing bubble, and then, right. Now we are here in 2021, just kind of coming out of the pandemic. Do you feel like kind of seeing these sort of ebbs and flows in a way kind of prepared you for like, okay, like something else is happening. I've seen this before. I know there's another side to it. Yeah. Yeah,
I do. And I'm much older now, and I think I got that from my father because he lived through the Depression. My grandfather went out of business, and I don't know why. And I think I learned that work ethic from my dad, and that sense of optimism. In 2008, he was about 90 years old, and he was still working and still kicking, and he was a financial guy. But his thing was, when the recession hit, he was of the mind where you just have to go out and spend the money if you can, because it's all about, the velocity of money that's going to get us back into business. He was a Roosevelt guy, an FDR guy, but so I got that from him. But what I really learned from Kathan Brown at Crown Point Press is, I'm so indebted to her. She was really like a second mother to me and to many of us who worked for her. And I started there a week before the 1989 earthquake in San Francisco, and the building wasn't leveled, but it was condemned, and we had to get everything out of there in about 3 days. And the presses out the second story window and everything before the city came and red tagged it and to destroy it. Long story short, I was part of that. We set up in a garage on Howard Street, and she kept things going, and then she dug up the money to buy this building at great risk, and we designed the studios. So I had her as a mentor, and we were all very lucky to have worked with her. She's a very optimistic woman, and throughout my life, whenever I needed some advice, I'd go to her. And she always had good business advice. And after surviving the earthquake, after only working there a week, we were working on these giant Al Held prints, and I was Brian Schur, who wrote the Shinkole book, who now is at Anderson Ranch, he and I were the only ones in the building because it struck about 5:15 and everybody split. And I'm sitting there at the desk. I'd literally only been working there a week, and this big speaker that they had up on the bookshelf fell and slammed into this big Al-held print and giant dent in it. And I went, oh my God, we got to get out of here. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but I've seen a lot of ups and downs, and thanks to people in my life like Kathan and John Cage too, who he's such an optimist. It's like it's going to work out, and we made it through the pandemic, and I feel very lucky and privileged. We are very privileged, I myself being a white privileged male in this country. I know that I am extremely lucky, and that's why we try to give back to the community, but also there was a lot of pain and suffering through this, and we just feel lucky that we survived it, when some other people went out of business and worse. So
I feel like I've just heard such wonderful things about Kathan and how, people like her, they really are such important figures in our world and in printmaking and in, the history of keeping this technology, this culture alive. Because I think, Crown Point and the etchings that they produce and the standard to which it's raised what people, I think about when they think about etchings, I don't think it can be understated. So it's just, it's beautiful. What I always hear too is just great stories about her, like what you're saying is, her optimism and her work ethic, because I feel like it always just, I don't know, it inoculates me with a little bit of like, okay, like it's going to be okay if you can like have like an ounce of that in you.
She tells the story often. I'll say briefly, but it's in the videos in her book and everything. She was in London studying etching, and then she rescued this rusted old press outside the backyard of where she was renting an apartment, and put it on a boat and shipped it, through the Panama Canal to California. That was her first press, and it's still there.
It is? Oh, that's great.
Yeah. She cleaned it up and she used it. Yeah. So I mean, those things are important. They were standing on the shoulders of the people who helped us here, and I know that's a cliche, but it's true.
It's true. Yeah, it's absolutely true. I love to make sure that we have a chance maybe to talk about a bit of what you were saying about sort of like giving back and like using a platform and, utilizing the privilege that you have, that people like you and I, both have, to find a way to kind of do something useful with it, to be of service with it. And I know that you spoke a little bit about how your presses are used for social justice projects, for posters and broadsides and wheat paste ups. So maybe you can talk about some of the recent projects that you've done that sort of falls under that umbrella.
Yeah, well, as much as I can, that's what I've been yearning for and striving for the past several years. And we've worked with high school youth in San Francisco at a place called Youth Art Exchange, and they have after-school classes for kids for free. So we worked on semester-long projects with high school students on projects that involved letterpress and screen printing that were important to them, gun violence and things like gentrification in neighborhoods. And so they would come up with ideas, and we would just mentor them and help them do that. And what else? Well, as teaching at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland, I was adjunct there, and I teach from time to time, trying to do my best to get my students involved in knowing that the press is really an important instrument in keeping culture alive and keeping information going. And I always pontificate, there's that word again, about if you own a press, that's powerful, right? And I always, and anyone who's heard me talk about this, if they're listening to this, are going to say, oh God, here he goes again. But the printing press really changed so much in our history, going back forever, and the American Revolution, and when you think about printmaking in Latin America, and just how that's how information got out there. So when armies took over, when a city was being taken over, the presses were the first thing that were being destroyed, just like the radio stations and the TV stations, and now the internet. So when the internet goes down, we still have letter presses. But specifically, what you're asking, I haven't done enough. That's the thing. It has been around workshops and just opening up the presses here in Portland from time to time when my students want to, do posters and stuff. But with that in mind, we've started to raise money through this thing about it's called the Undergrowth Educational Print Fund. What we're doing is we started an internship program. So we had some seed money last year, and we raised enough money to start a program where we put out an open call for printmakers to come to apply to be an intern, right? So the idea is that it's kind of like maybe a post-bac thing. If they have a BFA or an equivalent, they don't have had gone to school. If they didn't go to school, that's okay. But if they can show passion and equivalent learning and a passion to keep learning, and maybe want to go on to get an MFA or start their own shop or go work for another shop or just have their own studio practice, we have the money to hire one person for 9 months, the fall and spring semester. So it's like during their break year, perhaps. And we just started it, and we're finishing our first 6 months. And we hired a wonderful intern who was selected out of many applicants. Alejandra actually just hired her on as a full-time assistant. But long story short, what we're doing with this educational program is we're setting up internship programs to train printers, right? And we're just getting started. Hopefully, we're going to have another open call soon. Hopefully, we'll be able to have more than one intern a year. But the next thing is we're going to design a residency program in 2022 where BIPOC artists can apply with a project in mind around social justice, and they will have studio space, access to the presses, access to exhibitions, and even publishing to get their work out with social justice messaging. So we're really stoked about that, and we've got a lot going on in terms of just offering up our mentorship presses. Because, as I said, I'm a privileged white male in this society. I own presses, and I think that they should be used for whatever they can be used for in addition to the fine art publishing we're doing. So I don't know if I can articulate it very well, but that's my dream and the dream of my business partner, Harry Schneider, and we're going to continue our own business. We have to keep the doors open, but through donations through a fiscal sponsor, which are tax deductible, we can also kind of spread the wealth to people who are passionate about printmaking and want to keep working. So we teach our interns a lot that they wouldn't normally learn in school. Let's just put it that way. That's the other goal. Technically, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can definitely imagine. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it reminds me what you were saying about, teaching younger people things that they wouldn't learn in school. I was talking to a colleague of mine a couple of days ago, and we were just talking about a potential project with printmaking, doing something like that. And one of the things she said was that basically she's twins, 2 7-year-old boys, and she was saying that there's basically no art in public schools anymore.
Right.
And that was something that I hadn't really realized, I think in part having not even set foot on American soil in years now. But I think also, not having kids, not really being kind of plugged into what's happening. And so I just sort of picture public school being my experience of public school, which is now 20 years old, right?
Right, right.
So it's like, yeah, it was great. We had a ceramic studio, and we got to do lino cuts, and she's just like, no, that's gone for the most part. And really thinking about that in terms of how that really is going to affect this generation of kids growing up, because some of my fondest, clearest memories of being in school were of being in the art studios there and being a really fucking weird kid that like no one really liked, but like
Right.
my art teacher liked me,
Right.
my art teacher encouraged me, and like that meant a lot. And it really made me think about how printmaking, with its communal nature, with its multiplicity nature, with its connection to politics and social justice, it really is such a beautiful vehicle for maybe supplementing some of that experience for the young kids, the young people these days, because it was so important to me, and I know so important to so many people. And so it's wonderful to hear that you're taking that on. And I hope that it's something that many of us who have privilege, who have time, who have a press, which, as you say, is power, maybe can think about taking on as well, because it's so needed. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And there are a lot of great programs going on, and a lot of people are doing really good work and working really hard, and that in Portland and the Bay Area. And our residency program is going to start at our studio in San Francisco. We have a studio at the Minnesota Street Project Studios in Dogpatch, and that's where we keep our 2 letter presses. So it's a small little studio, but perfect to get a start there. And yeah, I mean it's necessary. It's good work, but I do know a lot of my former students have gone on to teach high school and community college and are really working. Equity is taught, and art is taught. I didn't mean to make disparaging comments about students not learning anything in school. They learn a lot in school. I just want to be clear. It's they get a good solid education in terms of conceptual ideas, presentation. I just see from time to time that technical skills are sometimes lost a little bit in certain programs. Not lost, but there's only so much time. You have 2 years to get your degree, your MFA degree, and you can't learn everything. So we're sort of augmenting that, because the interns I've worked with over the years, they jump in and they start learning everything we do, and we put them to work doing the tasks that we do. We don't, they're not tearing down paper for 2 months straight or sweeping the floors, running out for coffee. It's a really well-rounded sort of education, and I've kind of been doing that for years. But now now we have the money to actually pay them, so it's great.
Yes, yeah, and I think that that dichotomy between sort of technical knowledge and theoretical knowledge, and what you can write about versus what you can do, and sort of practicality versus philosophy. It's something that comes up a lot in the conversations that I have through the podcast. And I think it's something also that, depends a lot on, where people receive their education. As we know, there are schools that are, more technically minded or more theoretically minded. And it's always a really interesting one. And I think it's one that's particularly interesting within the field of printmaking, because technical knowledge is so wed to printmaking. It really, in a way that, isn't maybe the case in other media. In order to make an image that that reflects your intentions in a medium like etching, you need to know a fair few things, just sort of technical knowledge to make that happen. So yeah, it's a really interesting topic for me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's technical knowledge that connects us to uh, centuries of makers and printmakers and artists. It's really rich, and you have to learn it, otherwise you can't make good work. And it brings up the idea of craft, and craft is really coming back. It was just such a bad word for such a long time. And I think especially the young people these days are really stoked to like learn how to do this stuff, and analog printing and the photogravure process the way we do it is all analog. And it's really it's like it just connects you with something deep and rich. you know
Yeah. I do wonder about, and I don't know if this is too reductive of a way to speak about a whole generation, but if there's something really rewarding for the quote unquote digital natives to engage in an analog technology like printmaking, to see that they can work on a physical matrix, a physical paper, and get something that you can hold in your hand, that you can hang on a wall, that you can give as a gift, that's in the real world, if that really speaks to them.
Yeah, I mean that's it. You articulated it much better than I've ever been, but that's for sure. I find that it's really great.
That's such good news.
I started doing black and white darkroom photography again, and doing large format work, 8x10 negatives, and I was stirring some developer a couple months ago in the darkroom, and I just remembered my professor, Perkle Jones at the Art Institute in San Francisco, who had worked with Minor White and Ansel Adams and all, and he was already an old man when I met him, but he's probably younger than I am now. And I just suddenly I remembered him saying, "Don't pour it all in at once. You have to slowly, mix the powder into the warm water." And it's like, I hadn't thought of that in years, and all this stuff comes back. It's kind of like, and he always talked about it as magic. When the image came up, he's like, "Oh, it's so magical." And he had been doing it for years at that point, but he would still get excited when you see that latent image come up in the developer, and it's just that sort of excitement about the hands-on stuff that I learned from him, and John Cage too, and all the others I learned from. It was like, it's really great. And I think if we can teach that way, the students have that natural reaction anyway, because digital culture, you never get a chance to see an image appear on photo paper in the developer. It's only something you see in black and white movies or something, James Bond movies.
Yes, spy movies, definitely. And I think the image appear in the developer, or the final key plate revealing a finished image when you lift up the paper. I think there's very kind of similar moments of the reveal and the satisfaction of all the effort and the tweaking and the, trying to get things just right. And then all of a sudden in this, as you say, magic, there it appears. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the opposite is true too, because it can be a heartbreaking failure, and that's an important thing to have in your life too.
Yes.
That first proof, and you pull the paper off the plate and pull the blankets back, and you pull it up, and you're like, "Oh my God, this really sucks." Okay, we have to go back.
Yeah. But hey, there's, what is it, like no reward without risk. If it was great every time, all the great times wouldn't have meaning, right? I feel like I'd love to, with the time we have left, and I know this is like a huge question, so we might just have to have you back on if we don't have time to fully go into it. But I want to make sure that we've got a little bit of tape where I can ask you about the collaborative process, because you've worked with some incredible artists. You got to, get your feet wet with John Cage. So that's, no pressure, just kind of starting out. And maybe just some words of wisdom for people out there who are interested in collaborative printmaking or starting publishing studios of their own, of what is your process like when you go into creating something in a collaborative way with an artist? Do you have a checklist that you run through? Do you kind of feel them out individually? What is that like for you as the collaborative printmaker?
Yes, no checklist.
Uh-huh.
I only I learned a long time ago that I only work with people I really admire and that I can hang out with for a week or so. My rule is I never work with people I haven't met, and I never invite people to come that I haven't met. I broke that rule once. I invited Swoon to come to work to publish prints, and she graciously accepted, and I knew it was going to work out, and it did. And I just wanted to work with her so badly. So, but we had never met. We'd only talked on the phone. Anyway, I don't know. And the collaborative process, that's funny because going back to Crown Point Press and my mentor, Kathan, who I love, that's the one sort of area that we probably don't see eye to eye on. The way she has always run her shop is she doesn't consider a true collaboration. She considers it that the printers are technicians, and we were trained to just be technicians and try not to offer advice about anything that goes into the work aesthetically. If you know what I mean, it's kind of like deliver the plates, we etch them, and we give all the advice and input on how to get the aquatint just right, or whether the line's going to work, and how the colors are going to work. But when I branched off on my own, I found myself working much more collaboratively. In other words, I bring a lot to the project in terms of my own aesthetics around paper, because I've spent so much time in Japan, and I worked with scroll mounting, so a scroll mounter. So a lot of the projects we do involve Asian papers, big, ambitious joining of prints and backing them and making like these Sandow Burke prints that are 42 feet long, and we're just about to start a new etching of his. It's going to be more than 8 feet tall and 6 feet wide. So I don't know. I'm sort of rambling. I try to keep my ego out of it, but I'm maybe not that successful, But I depend a lot on the younger people around me to keep me in line. The interns and my business partner Harry, who's now the head printer here. It's kind of I defer to the other people in the room because I don't have all the answers. Through Zen, I've learned over the years it's good to have a beginner's mind and it goes back to Cage. It's like, I don't have any answers. I don't know. I'll try everything anything just to make the project work. This probably isn't answering your question, but the way I work is if I invite an artist to come in, we don't premeditate anything at all. The artist also, well, do you want me to bring some drawings in or some, we don't do reproductions of paintings, of course, or anything like that. And I'm like, yeah, you can bring some drawings, some ideas, or if we're working on an etching project, maybe we'll try to nail down the plate size. Maybe we can cut some 20 by 24 plates, but generally I say just come. The way we work is just come and we'll figure it out. And they're like, well, I know nothing about printmaking. And I said, well, that's sometimes way better. I've worked with a lot of people who had never done prints before. I've worked with a lot of people who really knew their way around a print shop, like, Sol le Wit, and Robert Kushner and John, of course, and I'm naming all the men, and many, many great women too, obviously, like Judy Pfaff and Joyce Kozlov. But it's really great if you don't premeditate it. If you have the luxury of time in a few days to just start throwing out ideas and making test plates, that's the way I like to go. It's hard to publish. Advice to print publishers who want to get into publishing, that, it's like, I don't know, don't give up your day job. It's a hard way to make money. So you have to, what was educational programming, workshops, contract printing. We never take on contract jobs we don't believe in, though. We turn a lot down, but you have to make money doing contract work. And we have huge letterpress capabilities now, so we can do a lot of other stuff that people can afford and crank that out, and also again high quality that we believe in, but a price point that that people can afford. So we publish prints that sell for $35,000, and we publish prints that sell for $150,000. I think that would be my advice. It's not $150,000, but $150.
Right. Yeah.
Capabilities. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. So I just love collaborating and bouncing ideas back and forth, and we just try to give the artist everything she needs to get the vision worked out. And but monetarily, it's really hard sometimes because we work on pretty big, ambitious projects, and the paper opera costs a lot of money, as you know.
I really like a lot of what you were saying in there, and I think what you were saying about not taking on projects or people that you don't believe in is extremely significant, because I think that particularly in the young, hungry, anxious days, that's can really lead people astray. And I can speak as someone who's a maker and a collaborator in what I do with the podcast as well, is that if you get a sense kind of early on of like, I'm not sure this is going to be great, you're right. Trust that instinct. And I think the more you can kind of develop that muscle when you're doing something that involves the goodwill and good intentions of another person, you need to be able to rely on that and rely on your instinct of whether or not you're going to get that. So I think that that's really good, solid advice for collaborative printmaking and life, truly.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it is. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we were talking about the social justice aspect of printmaking and the hands-on, like analog, how that inspires people. But the other inspiring thing is printmaking is all about community. It's similar to ceramic artists that way too. It's kind of like, back in the day, it took a whole village to fire a kiln. Literally, it takes a group of people sometimes to own an etching press or a letter press. And that's what I would say to young people who are starting out is to, as they say in Hawaii, hui up, start a collective, start a community, get a few people together and buy a press. And it's hard. It's when you're young, it's kind of like starting a band, I imagine. Tempers flare and, egos get in the way. But if you find a group of people that you can work with, that's really important, right? I mean, you need to have. I think the community aspect is really important. It's not a solitary endeavor as it is for a painter or a poet or something like that. It's not for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think that as we, kind of start to discover in this past decade and this upcoming decade, really what smartphones and technology and the internet have done to us as a species. Like I said, I feel like it's really good news that you're seeing people want to return to in-person community, in-person art making, that physical relationship with the world around you and the staying power of a physical work of art. I think that the thing about Instagram is that it's so fleeting. It's the hungry beast. It's like that. Well, it's like a hungry ghost, right? Where it's never satisfied. It's always new images for 1 second, or not even that. But the power of focusing on one image and then having it exist in the physical world for, for potentially hundreds and hundreds of years, is because, of course, we have prints that are that old. There's something really powerful about that. And I just think that it's hopeful to hear that people are maybe discovering that, and that we've got, opportunities for them to do that in the world, like the ones you're providing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really important. I got off Instagram about the time COVID hit. I needed a break, and a lot of people say, you guys are really hard to find. Our website it could be better, and our Instagram hasn't had a post for over a year and a half. So I'm like, I kind of like it that way right now. It's not the best for business, but there's a certain amount of magic that we see in the studio that everything doesn't have to go out into the world. If you're serious about wanting to do what we do, then come visit us if you can.
I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up, because I always, ask, where can people find you to my guests? And so you said, through your website.
5112 Northwest 17th Street in Portland. Come knock on the door. We'll show you around. The website's MullowneyPrinting.com, and we'll try to update it a little better. But yeah.
That sounds great.
Go to our Mullowney Printing Instagram if you want to see what we did up until December of 2019. 2020.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love it too, because it's kind of a throwback to the beginning of your story of just walking up and knocking on the door of Crown Point. So, find yourself in Portland and go knock on the door and make a real human connection. I think that's a beautiful message. Yeah.
But you can find us too at our San Francisco studio. It's at Minnesota Street Project in Dogpatch, and the phone number's on the website. Maybe, I don't know. Just shoot us an email, and if you're in San Francisco or Portland, we'd be happy to show you around. And then we go to the print fairs when the EAB print fair is up and running again. We'll be in New York for that.
Excellent. Well, it has been just delightful to be able to chat and learn more about you and your background and the connection you have to printmaking and what you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really great. I appreciate it very much. I'm honored.
Well, that's our show for this week. Join me again next week when my guest will be Dolores Desad. Dolores is an etcher originally from the UK who now lives and works on Koh Samui, a beautiful island in the Gulf of Thailand. We'll talk about hiking, orca, natural disasters, and the ways in which humans think they're in control and are mistaken. This episode, like all episodes, was written and produced by me, Miranda Metcalf, with editing by Timothy Pauschak and music by Joshua Weber. I'll see you next week.